Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The hallway felt smaller than it should have, the walls closing in with every breath I took. Maybe it was the silence, thick and electric, or maybe it was the way he stood so close that even the air between us felt claimed. One second I was walking past him, pretending nothing had changed between us. The next my back met the cool wall with a quiet thud, and the world seemed to hold its breath. His hand caught my wrist before I could move away. Not violently, not gently either. Just enough to make it clear that leaving wasn't part of the moment anymore. My pulse hammered so loudly I wondered if both of them could hear it. The dim light from the living room spilled into the hallway, outlining his shoulders, the sharp angle of his jaw, the focus in his eyes. It wasn't anger I saw there. It was something far more dangerous: certainty. "You keep pretending," he murmured, his voice low, almost calm, "like none of this exists." His fingers tightened slightly around my wrist, grounding me to the moment I'd tried to ignore for weeks. Behind him the house was quiet. Too quiet. And that silence meant only one thing. My husband was still there. I didn't need to turn to know it. I could feel his presence like a shadow lingering just beyond the doorway, watching the scene unfold with the kind of stillness that meant he didn't know whether to intervene or stay frozen where he stood. For a long time nothing happened. No shouting, no sudden movement, just the three of us caught in a moment that had been building slowly, quietly, like a storm none of us had admitted was coming. I finally looked up at the man in front of me, and the air between us shifted instantly. His expression softened for a fraction of a second, as if something unspoken passed between us. An understanding, a challenge, maybe even a warning. "You should let me go," I said, though my voice lacked the strength the words suggested. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "Should I?" he asked. The question hung there, heavy and impossible, because the truth was far more complicated than either of us wanted to admit. Weeks ago this had been nothing more than glances across a room, conversations that lasted a little too long, the kind of charged silence that followed a joke that wasn't really a joke. I had convinced myself it meant nothing. But moments like this had a way of exposing lies, especially the ones we told ourselves. Behind him I finally heard movement, the faint shift of weight on the floor. My husband was still watching, still standing there, caught between disbelief and something else I couldn't quite name. Shock, maybe, or curiosity. The hallway light flickered slightly as someone shifted again, and suddenly every small movement felt amplified. The slow rise of my chest as I breathed, the warmth of the hand still holding my wrist, the quiet tension stretching between all three of us. No one spoke, no one moved, and yet everything had already changed. His grip loosened just enough for me to pull away if I wanted to, but I didn't. Instead I stayed exactly where I was, my back against the wall, my eyes locked with his, fully aware of the silent witness standing only a few steps away. The moment stretched longer, and longer, until he leaned slightly closer and whispered something so quiet that only I could hear it. And in that instant I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of something none of us were ready to stop. The silence stretched longer than I expected, thick and heavy, each heartbeat echoing louder than words. He didn't let go, and I didn't pull away. Instead our eyes held, and in that gaze something unspoken passed between us. A dangerous blend of curiosity, desire, and hesitation. It was as if the world had shrunk to the narrow hallway, the air vibrating with things we weren't saying, things we couldn't admit. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. His thumb traced a slow, deliberate path over the back of my hand, and I felt a shiver run through me that had nothing to do with the chill in the hallway. Every small gesture was amplified by the silence, every subtle movement carrying the weight of 1,000 thoughts neither of us dared voice. My chest tightened, my pulse racing, and I realized I hadn't even noticed that my husband had shifted slightly, his presence a quiet, tense rhythm behind me. "You're thinking too much," he said, his voice low, almost teasing, but it carried an edge that made it impossible to ignore. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Words would have shattered the fragile tension, and I wanted it to last, wanted the quiet electricity to hum between us a little longer. He stepped slightly closer, just enough that I felt the warmth of his body without a single physical touch. The brush of his sleeve against mine was accidental, or so it seemed, but it sent sparks through my veins, making me acutely aware of every inch of space we occupied. My breath hitched, and I looked up at him, trying to hide the reaction I couldn't quite control. He noticed. Of course he noticed. His gaze softened ever so slightly, the intensity giving way to something almost vulnerable. And for a moment the man in front of me wasn't the one holding me here. He was just him. The hallway felt smaller with every step, every shift, every silent second. I wanted to retreat, to step back into the safe space of routine and certainty. But the pull between us was magnetic. I felt it in my chest, my stomach, even my hands, a raw, undeniable tension that had been simmering for weeks now finally burning. I shouldn't, I whispered, almost to myself. He tilted his head, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Shouldn't what? The words hung, fragile and taut, between us. It was a challenge, a question, a temptation all rolled into one. I wanted to say something, anything, but the right words were elusive. Instead, I just let my eyes linger on his, tracing the line of his jaw, the subtle curve of his mouth, the way his brows furrowed slightly as if he was reading every thought flickering across my face. Behind me I sensed the quiet tension of my husband like a shadow I couldn't ignore, but for once I didn't care. The space between us felt electric, alive with something neither of us had named, and I realized that this was the moment before everything shifted, before decisions, before consequences, before clarity. For now it was just this, the heat, the hesitation, the undeniable pull that held us in suspended balance. The hallway didn't feel like a hallway anymore. It felt like a stage, the three of us trapped in a quiet drama of desire, curiosity, and restraint, and I couldn't stop the rapid fluttering in my chest. And yet, I didn't move. I didn't look away. The tension between us seemed to thicken with every passing second, almost visible in the narrow hallway. My hand itched to reach out, to close the small gap between us, yet I couldn't. Not because I didn't want to, but because wanting it too much made the act of touching impossible. Desire had a weight to it, a gravity that pressed down on my chest and kept me frozen in place. I felt it in the subtle heat radiating from him, in the quiet, deliberate way he held himself just close enough that every nerve ending in my body hummed. His eyes didn't leave mine. There was curiosity there, yes, but also restraint, as if he too knew the danger in crossing the invisible line that hovered between us. Every flicker of emotion, longing, regret, amusement, something darker, I didn't dare name, passed silently across his features. I wanted to ask what he was thinking. I wanted to confide in the truth of my own heart, but the words would betray too much, and I wasn't ready to be that vulnerable. Behind him I sensed the quiet presence of my husband, still observing, still holding his breath as though the air itself might shatter if he moved. That awareness made it even more impossible to act. Every glance, every breath, every inch of movement was layered with caution, fear, and a strange exhilaration that made my pulse spike. I wanted to lean in, to close the distance, yet the walls I had built around my heart, and the unspoken rules of what was allowed, held me back. He shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, and I felt the brush of his sleeve against my arm again. Just a ghost of contact. Yet it sent fire through me. I caught my own hand mid-motion, realizing that for a brief suspended moment, my fingers had almost reached for his. Almost. And then I pulled back, not from lack of desire, but because the craving was too much to act on. Acting would change everything, irrevocably, and the weight of that possibility pressed down on both of us. Why do we always pretend, he murmured, voice barely audible, that this tension doesn't exist? I wanted to answer, to tell him that I felt the same pull, the same fire, the same forbidden curiosity, but my throat tightened, and only silence came. My eyes flicked toward the small space behind him, where my husband still lingered like a silent witness, a reminder of the boundaries we couldn't cross, no matter how much we might wish to. The air felt thick, humid almost, charged with something neither of us could fully name. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears, every breath seemed synchronized. I wanted to close the distance, to lean in, but instead I let my gaze linger just a second too long. And he did the same, just enough that we both knew what was unsaid, yet neither of us could risk speaking it aloud. The hallway was no longer just a passage between rooms. It had become a crucible for our unspoken desires, for the layers of secrets and restraint that bound us. We were dangerously close to losing control, yet the external walls, the husband watching, the fear of consequences, the weight of what was right versus what we felt, kept us tethered. And so we remained, suspended in that fragile, heated limbo, two people drawn to each other with magnetic force, yet pulled back by everything that mattered. Every accidental touch, every hesitant glance, every pause in our breathing added to the tension, thickening the air with longing that could not yet, would not yet, be named. The hallway had shrunk to just the space we occupied, the world outside its walls fading to nothing. Every sound, the soft creak of the floor, the subtle shift of weight, the quiet rhythm of our own breathing, was amplified, filling the air between us like an unspoken symphony. My chest felt too full, as if the tension itself had weight, pressing down on my ribcage, making every heartbeat thrum louder than it should. He stepped closer, almost imperceptibly, and the warmth from his body brushed against mine. Not touching, not yet, but close enough that the space between us felt charged, electric. I wanted to close that gap, to let the desire that had been simmering for weeks finally flow. But something deeper held me back. The longing wasn't just about him. It was about everything standing between us. The rules, the consequences, the fragile trust I didn't dare break. You shouldn't be here, I whispered, though the words sounded hollow, even to me. My voice trembled in a way I didn't expect, revealing the truth I wasn't ready to admit, that I wanted this, more than I could bear. He tilted his head, eyes softening, but the intensity didn't fade. And yet, here I am, he murmured, low enough that only I could hear. There was no accusation, no demand, only the undeniable pull of two people teetering on the edge of surrender. Our gazes locked, and in that moment, time seemed to stretch. I felt the brush of his breath on my cheek, the subtle tilt of his body leaning toward mine. It was a whisper of a touch, a collision of presence and intent, without crossing the line. My fingers itched, hovering near his, aching for connection, and I realized that even a fraction of contact would feel like the world breaking apart. Behind him, the faint awareness of my husband lingered, a shadow tethering us to reality. But even that presence couldn't dull the heat building between us. Every second that passed made the air thicker, heavier, more intimate. Every glance, every shift of weight, every accidental brush of sleeves intensified what neither of us could name aloud. I wanted to speak, to confess, to tell him the truth of what I felt, how dangerous it was, how intoxicating. My lips parted, almost forming words, but the weight of the moment stopped them. Instead, I exhaled, letting the tension settle just slightly, a soft surrender that felt louder than any sentence. He leaned in closer, and I felt the faintest pressure, the tiniest movement that could be a touch, a brush or a whisper of intention. It sent shivers down my spine, leaving me trembling in a way that wasn't fear. It was need, desire, anticipation, raw and unspoken. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, letting the moment wash over me, savoring the closeness without letting it cross the line. And then he spoke, so softly that it almost became part of the silence. I can't not feel this. The words hovered in the air between us, as fragile and potent as the space separating our bodies. My heart surged, my chest tightened, and for a brief suspended instant it felt as if we had touched, even though nothing had. The world outside the hallway had disappeared. There was only us, the electric space between, and the silent confession that had finally broken through. Everything trembled on the edge, a heartbeat away from surrender. And then it paused. We didn't move, we didn't speak, and yet everything had shifted. The rain tapped softly against the window, a gentle rhythm that matched the beating of our hearts. The room was bathed in the muted glow of a single lamp, shadows dancing across the walls, casting the space in golden, intimate light. It felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of us. No past, no consequences, only the raw pulse of presence and longing. He stood close enough that the warmth of his body seeped into mine. I could feel it everywhere, in the small brush of his shoulder against mine, in the quiet alignment of our breaths, in the electric hum that seemed to vibrate through the air around us. For weeks we had danced on the edge of something forbidden, restrained by unspoken rules and fears. Tonight all of that dissolved into a delicate surrender, a letting go that was as frightening as it was liberating. Her breath melted into his, not in sound, but in the silence that carried everything unspoken. Their eyes met, wide and full of confession, and in that gaze, years of hesitation and restraint seemed to lift, leaving only raw, exquisite presence. Their hands hovered, brushed, lingered, fingertips speaking the words mouths could not. Every slight contact ignited a spark, a quiet fire that flared in the gentle hush of the room. The air felt thick, humid, charged with emotion. Every inhale drew them closer without moving. Every exhale shared a weight of longing that had been held back far too long. It wasn't about desire alone, it was trust, curiosity, the relief of finally admitting the truth that had hovered in glances, in soft smiles, in the spaces between sentences. The night itself seemed to bend around them, cocooning their shared vulnerability. A laugh escaped him, quiet and shaky, a reflection of relief as much as joy, and it drew a smile from her that lit her eyes. Their bodies leaned almost imperceptibly into each other, not for action but to anchor themselves in the moment, to feel the gravity of presence and connection. The heat of skin against skin, not in touch but in proximity, spoke louder than any words ever could. Their hearts conversed, beating in unison, telling stories of hesitation, courage and surrender. Outside, the rain blurred the city into streaks of silver and shadow, isolating them in a private world of warmth and light. The lamp flickered gently, casting soft highlights on hair, cheeks, the curve of a shoulder, the subtle arch of a neck. Every detail became intimate, every glance monumental. It was breathtaking, elegant, an intimacy built from anticipation, release and understanding rather than anything tangible. For the first time there was no holding back. There was no fear of consequences, no barrier of hesitation. Only the sensation of being fully seen, fully known and fully alive in the shared space between them. The night stretched infinitely, a delicate suspension of reality, where time slowed, breaths synchronized, and hearts spoke with an eloquence that words could never capture. And in that quiet suspended universe they simply existed together. Their closeness a language of its own, their warmth a confession, their gaze a promise. It was the night they let go, not in reckless abandon, but in exquisite unspoken surrender. The morning light spilled unevenly across the room, soft and pale, brushing against the tangled sheets and casting long shadows on the walls. The night's warmth had faded into a still, heavy quiet. The kind of quiet that leaves you raw, exposed and strangely suspended between relief and regret. He lay beside her, not touching, not needing to, yet the nearness of him still pressed against her like a presence she couldn't escape. The air was thick with everything left unsaid, confessions, hesitations, promises they hadn't spoken aloud. Her chest rose and fell with slow deliberate breaths, each inhale a reminder of the gravity of what had happened. It wasn't a simple memory of closeness, it was a collision of hearts, a crossing of lines, a surrender that neither could take back. The guilt came first, subtle, almost imperceptible, curling in her stomach like smoke. Was it love? Or just a fleeting escape from the silence and longing that had grown between them for months? Her mind replayed the night in fragments, the way his breath had mingled with hers, the delicate brush of a hand that spoke more than words ever could, the soft laughter that had broken the tension without breaking the moment. She wasn't sure if it was tenderness or temptation, relief or recklessness. He turned slightly, as if sensing the swirl of her thoughts, and their eyes met. There was no accusation, no need to justify, only the quiet acknowledgement of what had passed. The connection between them had deepened, thickened, rooted in shared vulnerability and undeniable truth. For a moment it was enough to just exist together, to hold space for the aftermath, to breathe without having to name it. And then the room shifted. A soft knock at the door, hesitant, almost timid, pulled both of them from their fragile cocoon. Her heart skipped a beat. Not guests, not a neighbor, not anyone they expected. Who? She whispered. The door opened slightly, and a figure stepped in, one she hadn't anticipated. Someone whose presence carried weight, someone whose knowledge could shift everything. The surprise, the sudden intrusion made her chest tighten, yet she felt the invisible thread between her and him strengthen, taut with unspoken allegiance. The moment of vulnerability they had shared was suddenly alive with consequence, reminding them that the night's surrender had changed something fundamental. For a long while, no one spoke. The room was a vessel of tension, memory and reflection. Outside the soft drizzle continued, tracing thin lines down the window pane, a quiet witness to everything that had shifted inside. Their hands brushed briefly as they moved, and for an instant it felt like coming home. It wasn't about desire anymore, it was about recognition, about the depth of connection that had quietly formed, resilient and irrevocable. She exhaled, letting herself sink into the ambiguity of the morning, the messy human reality of it all. It wasn't neat, it wasn't simple, but it was alive. They had crossed a threshold, and the world beyond the room could wait. In that fragile quiet moment something had changed between them. The night had passed, yet its echo lingered, intimate and untamed, a reminder that even amidst uncertainty, some truths and some connections could not be undone. The afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, painting the room in warm golds and muted ambers. The world outside moved on in its usual rhythm, but inside there was a stillness that spoke of quiet understanding. He sat beside her, their knees almost touching, and for the first time since that fateful hallway, the tension that had built between them felt settled into something gentler, something that could breathe. No words were needed. The space between them was rich with unspoken acknowledgement, with the weight of shared vulnerability that had stretched over nights and mornings of longing, restraint and eventual surrender. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had always belonged together. The simple gesture carried everything they had once feared to admit: desire, trust, and a promise of patience. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder, the smallest movement, yet it felt monumental. It wasn't a climax of passion or a sudden declaration, but rather a slow, deliberate letting of hearts choose each other. Every breath they shared was a quiet conversation, every glance an affirmation that what had passed between them was neither a fleeting indulgence nor a secret to be buried. It was real, and it was theirs. He lowered his lips to her forehead, gentle, reverent, as if the touch could carry a lifetime of reassurance. Her eyes closed, and she let herself sink into the warmth of the moment, the sensation of being seen, understood and held without question. Around them the room hummed with soft light and the lingering trace of rain from earlier, a reminder of the night that had changed everything. Outside the world waited, but here, in this quiet cocoon, time had slowed. They didn't need to speak about the past, the mistakes or the fragile hearts they had carried into this space. The connection they shared was enough, a steady pulse of intimacy and care that promised continuity without demand. It was love, or something beautifully close, patient, knowing, and alive. Perhaps there would be challenges later. Perhaps life would intrude with its ordinary chaos. But in this moment nothing could disturb the fragile peace they had forged together. Her hand flexed gently in his, a silent acknowledgement that some things once shared leave indelible traces, like perfume on the skin or a song that refuses to leave the mind. And so they remained, just two people in the soft golden light of afternoon. Hearts steady, breaths mingling, bodies close enough to feel the warmth of presence, a slow exhale of relief, a quiet smile shared, a promise held without words. This was the conclusion of a storm neither had asked for yet both had needed, a testament to desire, restraint and the quiet triumph of human connection. The memory of tension, longing and the raw magnetism that had pulled them together lingered, but now it was gentle, poignant and full of life. A closing note that left the heart both full and aching, an ending as elegant and electric as the beginning.